She once looked at her husband and saw nothing but shame. No car, no steady income, no status. In her world, love without money was an embarrassment. So she did what she believed was right. She humiliated him, called him a failure, and threw him out of her house like he was nothing. That night, a man lost his marriage, his dignity, and his place in the world. But life has a cruel sense of timing. 2 years later, that same man walked back into her life, not as a beggar, not as a worker, but as the man who had just bought her father's company. The power had shifted, the tables had turned, and the woman who once spat on his poverty now had to face the price of her choices. Before we go on, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if stories of justice, pain, and redemption move you, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Kwame stood alone in a small rented room, staring at his reflection in a cracked mirror. The black suit he was wearing did not belong to him. It had been tailored, paid for, and delivered by his future father-in-law. Even the shoes on his feet were borrowed. As he adjusted his tie with trembling fingers, a quiet fear settled deep in his chest. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of his life. Yet beneath the excitement, Kwame felt exposed. He had no car waiting outside, no job offer tucked into his pocket, no savings to fall back on. All he had was love and a stubborn belief that love could somehow be enough. He leaned closer to the mirror and whispered to himself, "I may have nothing now, but I love her. I will build something, I must." The door creaked open and Kofi, his closest friend since university, stepped inside holding a small camera and wearing an encouraging smile. "Kwame, why are you still here?" Kofi laughed. "The bride is almost downstairs. You're about to get married, my brother." Kwame forced a smile. "Do you ever feel like you're walking into something you're not ready for?" Kofi raised an eyebrow. "What kind of question is that?" Kwame exhaled slowly. "Amma grew up in comfort. Her father paid for everything, even this suit. I don't even have steady work. What if one day she wakes up and realizes I can't give her the life she's used to?" Kofi stepped closer and placed a firm hand on Kwame's shoulder. "Listen to me. Money can disappear. Status can vanish, but character stays. Amma chose you because she saw something real in you. Don't let fear ruin today." Kwame nodded, though his heart remained heavy. Downstairs, the wedding hall shimmered with wealth. White and gold decorations filled the space, fresh flowers lined every aisle, and soft music floated through the air. Guests arrived in luxury cars, dressed in expensive fabrics, laughing and greeting one another like life was always generous. Then the music changed. Amma appeared at the entrance holding her father's arm. She looked breathtaking in her white gown, the kind designed to impress. Her makeup was flawless, her smile practiced and elegant. But behind her eyes something flickered: uncertainty, maybe hesitation. Her father, Mr. Mensah, walked proudly beside her. A powerful businessman, respected and feared in equal measure, he surveyed the room like a king overseeing his kingdom. This wedding was not just a celebration, it was a display of his status. Kwame took his place at the altar, his heart pounding. When Amma reached him, she barely met his eyes. The officiant began the ceremony. "Kwame, do you take Amma to be your wife, to love and honor her in riches and in poverty?" Kwame did not hesitate. "I do," he said firmly, "with all my heart." The officiant turned to Amma. "Do you take Kwame to be your husband?" Amma paused. Her eyes drifted briefly to her father. Mr. Mensah gave a small nod, controlled, measured, approving. "Yes," Amma said at last. "I do." Applause filled the hall. Cameras flashed. The officiant declared them husband and wife, and when Kwame kissed Amma, the crowd erupted in cheers. From the outside, it looked like a perfect union, but perfection can hide cracks. 2 months later, those cracks began to widen. Amma sat comfortably in her father's executive office, her legs crossed neatly as she signed documents with polished nails. Mr. Mensah watched her with satisfaction. "This role as my executive assistant will prepare you," he said. "You'll learn everything operations strategy leadership. One day this company will be yours." Amma smiled brightly. "Thank you, Daddy. You've made life so easy for me." "That's my duty," he replied. "You deserve the best." Meanwhile, in their quiet apartment, Kwame sat on the couch with his laptop balanced on his knees. The fan spun slowly above him, pushing warm air around the room. His inbox was open empty. He had sent dozens of proposals, construction firms, development projects, small contracts, big dreams. Nothing. He rubbed his eyes and whispered, "Just one chance, one contract." In the beginning, Amma had been supportive. She cooked meals. She sat beside him and said things like, "Don't worry, it will work out." But patience fades when comfort is threatened. One morning, Kwame lay on the bed, scrolling through project listings, searching for new opportunities. Amma entered the room dressed sharply for work, her perfume filling the space. She stopped when she saw him. "You're still in bed?" she asked sharply. "I've already sent proposals this morning," Kwame replied calmly. "There's a school project opening up in Tamale." "I applied." Amma laughed, not kindly. "Every week it's a new story, a new project, and every time nothing happens." Kwame sat up. "It takes time. Contracts don't fall from the sky." Her voice hardened. "Time. It's been months since we got married. I go to work every day, I pay bills, I carry this house while you sit here hoping." Kwame swallowed. "I'm not lazy, Amma. You know that. I'm tired," she snapped. "Tired of pretending. Tired of being the man in this house." She walked out, leaving silence behind. That evening, Kofi visited again, bringing snacks and laughter. For a brief moment, Kwame felt human. But when Amma returned and saw them, her face twisted with contempt. "So this is what you do all day," she said coldly. "Sit with your jobless friend and eat like everything is fine." Kofi stood awkwardly. "Good evening, Amma." She ignored him. "Kwame, don't you feel shame?" Kwame's heart sank. After Kofi left, Kwame sat alone, staring at the floor. He felt something breaking inside him, not loudly, but slowly. That night, as Amma lay facing the wall, Kwame gathered the courage to speak. "What you said today hurt me," he said quietly. "I just want you to believe in me." Amma turned sharply. "Believe in what dreams?" Kwame hesitated, then spoke softly. Maybe you could talk to your father. Just one small opportunity. I'll prove myself." Her eyes burned. "So that's why you married me, for my father's connections?" "No," Kwame said quickly. "I married you because I love you." She laughed bitterly. "Keep your love. Don't use my family." She turned away again, ending the conversation. Kwame sat in the dark, realizing something painful. Love alone was no longer enough, and the life he dreamed of building had already begun to crumble. The silence in the house grew heavier with each passing day. At first, Kwame told himself it was temporary, that Amma was just stressed, that once he secured a contract, everything would return to how it was in the beginning, warm, hopeful, gentle. But days turned into weeks and weeks into months, and the distance between them became a wall neither of them seemed willing to climb. Every morning, Amma left the house dressed in confidence. Her heels clicked against the tiled floor like a reminder of momentum, of purpose. She smelled of expensive perfume and certainty. She barely looked back when the door closed behind her. Kwame, on the other hand, remained behind in the quiet apartment. He treated his search like a full-time job. He woke early, bathed, dressed neatly, and sat at the small table with his laptop open. He researched projects, drafted proposals, revised budgets, calculated timelines, and sent emails until his fingers ached. He followed up politely. He waited. Rejection came in many forms. Some companies replied with short automated messages. Others promised to get back to him and never did. Many never responded at all. Still, Kwame did not give up. What hurt more than the silence of companies was the voice waiting for him at home. One evening, Amma arrived earlier than usual. She placed her handbag on the table and glanced at Kwame, who was still working. "You're still on that laptop?" she asked, her tone flat. "Yes," Kwame replied. "I've been shortlisted for a small commercial renovation. They want more details." Amma scoffed. "Shortlisted, always shortlisted, never selected." Kwame closed the laptop slowly. "Amma, please. Words matter." She laughed without humor. "Reality matters more." She poured herself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. "Do you know my colleagues think I'm lying? They ask me what my husband does, and I don't even know what to say anymore." Kwame felt a sharp sting. "You can tell them the truth. I'm an engineer looking for work." "No," she snapped. "I won't embarrass myself like that." That night, Kwame lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to Amma breathe on the other side of the bed. For the first time since they married, he felt like a guest in his own home. A week later, things took another turn. Amma invited two of her friends over. She worked with women who spoke confidently about investments, vacations, and promotions. Kwame tried to stay in the background, not wanting to intrude, but Amma didn't let him. "Kwame," she called from the living room, her voice sharp. "Can you bring drinks?" He did as asked, quietly placing glasses on the table. One of the women smiled awkwardly. "So, Kwame, what do you do?" Before he could answer, Amma spoke for him. "He's still figuring things out," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "You know how some people are." Kwame felt his face burn. He forced a polite smile and returned to the bedroom, where he sat on the edge of the bed with his hands clasped together. That night, when the guests had left, Kwame confronted her. "You didn't have to speak for me like that," he said. "You made me sound useless." Amma shrugged. "If the truth hurts, that's not my problem." Kwame's voice cracked. "I am your husband, not your burden." She turned to him, her eyes cold. "Then start acting like one." Something shifted inside Kwame then. A quiet realization settled in his chest. He was no longer fighting poverty alone. He was fighting humiliation inside his marriage. Days later, Kofi visited again. He found Kwame sitting by the window, lost in thought. "You don't look well," Kofi said gently. Kwame forced a smile. "I'm fine." Kofi shook his head. "No, you're not. I can see it." They spoke quietly away from Amma's ears. Kwame didn't say much, but his eyes said enough. That evening, Amma returned home to find the two men talking. Her mood darkened instantly. "Is this house now a meeting point for failures?" she said loudly. Kofi stood up. "Amma, that's unfair." She ignored him and faced Kwame. "While I'm out there building a future, you're here entertaining people." Kwame stood slowly. "He's my friend. He came to check on me." She laughed harshly. "Check on what? Your joblessness?" The word hit him like a slap. After Kofi left, he didn't say a word. He went straight to bed. That night, Kwame prayed silently. Not for money, not for success, but for strength. Because the man he was becoming scared him, a man growing quieter, smaller, invisible. The next morning brought another blow. Kwame received a call from a construction firm he had applied to weeks earlier. His heart raced as he answered. "Hello, this is Kwame speaking." "Yes," the voice said. "We reviewed your proposal. You're qualified, but we decided to go with someone else." Kwame thanked them politely and hung up. Amma overheard the call. So she asked, "Another rejection?" He nodded. She exhaled sharply. "I can't live like this anymore." Kwame looked up. "Like what?" "Like I married beneath myself," she said without hesitation. The words echoed in the room. Kwame stood up slowly. "Amma, do you hear yourself?" She crossed her arms. "I married a man with dreams and ended up with excuses." That night, Kwame realized the truth he had been avoiding. Amma no longer respected him, and without respect, love had no place to stand. He sat alone at the table, staring at his laptop. The screen reflected his tired face. He whispered, "I will not remain here forever." Outside, the city buzzed with life, opportunity, and indifference. Inside, a man quietly reached the edge of his endurance. And though he didn't know it yet, the fire being lit inside him would soon burn through everything that tried to reduce him to nothing. Kofi did not come to Kwame's house by accident that evening. He had called earlier in the day, his voice light but attentive. "I was in your area," he said. "I thought I'd stop by. We haven't talked properly in weeks." Kwame hesitated before answering. "You can come," he said at last. "I'll be home." By the time Kofi arrived, the sun was already sinking behind the buildings. The apartment felt unusually quiet. Kwame welcomed his friend with a tired smile, and for a moment it felt like old times. They sat in the living room, the fan humming above them, sharing snacks and memories of university days. Late nights, impossible deadlines, and dreams they once spoke about with fire in their eyes. "You were always the one with plans," Kofi said, chuckling softly. "Remember how you used to draw buildings on the back of lecture notes?" Kwame smiled faintly. "I still do. Just on a laptop now." Kofi studied him more closely. The smile didn't reach Kwame's eyes. "You look worn out, my brother." Kwame shrugged. "Life." Before Kofi could respond, the front door opened. Amma walked in, her heels sharp against the floor. She stopped when she saw Kofi. Her eyes swept across the room, the snacks on the table, the two men sitting comfortably, and her expression hardened. So she said slowly, "This is what you do all day." Kofi stood up instinctively. "Good evening, Amma." She didn't acknowledge him. Instead, she fixed her gaze on Kwame. "While I'm at work carrying responsibilities, you're here entertaining visitors." Kwame felt his stomach tighten. "Kofi just came to check on me." Amma laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Check on what? Your unemployment?" The word hung in the air like smoke. Kofi shifted uncomfortably. "Amma, that's not fair." She cut him off with a raised hand. "I wasn't talking to you." Kwame stood slowly. "Amma, please." Not in front of him. She turned fully toward him now, arms crossed. "Why not? Should I pretend everything is fine? Should I lie for you?" Kofi's face flushed. "I think I should leave." Amma nodded dismissively. "Yes, that would be best." Kwame followed Kofi to the door in silence. When it closed behind his friend, the room felt smaller, tighter, like it was closing in on him. Amma didn't wait long. "Do you know how embarrassing this is for me?" she demanded. "My colleagues ask about my husband, and this is what I have to show." Kwame's voice trembled. "I'm trying. Every day." "Trying doesn't pay bills," she snapped. "Trying doesn't earn respect." The word struck him harder than any insult before it. Respect. He had lost it. Kwame went to bed that night without speaking another word. Sleep didn't come easily. His mind replayed Amma's words again and again, each time cutting deeper. The next few days passed in a blur. Amma spoke only when necessary. Kwame buried himself in work, sending out more proposals, attending networking events, following leads that led nowhere. Then one afternoon his phone rang. Unknown number. Kwame's heart jumped as he answered. "Hello," a woman's voice came through. "We reviewed your application. We'd like to invite you for a project discussion next week." Kwame nearly dropped the phone. "Thank you," he said quickly. "Thank you so much." For the first time in months, hope surged through him. That evening, he waited for Amma to return home. When she did, he met her at the door. "I got a call today," he said, unable to hide the excitement in his voice. "A company wants to meet me about a project." Amma paused, then raised an eyebrow. "Another meeting." "This one feels different," Kwame insisted. "If it works out," she interrupted him. "Don't start celebrating yet. I've heard this story before." Kwame's excitement dimmed. Can't you just be happy for me even a little? She sighed loudly. I'll be happy when something actually changes. That night, Kwame lay awake again staring at the ceiling. But this time his thoughts were different. This time they were sharper. He realized something important. Amma no longer saw him as a partner. She saw him as a liability. A few days later, Kofi called. I shouldn't have left like that, he said. But I didn't want to make things worse. Kwame understood. You did the right thing. There was a pause. Then Kofi spoke carefully. My brother. This situation is not healthy. Kwame didn't respond. You deserve respect, Kofi continued. Marriage without respect will crush a man. Kwame swallowed hard. I know. That weekend, Amma invited her parents for dinner. Kwame tried to prepare himself mentally. He dressed neatly and rehearsed polite answers in his head. He hoped foolishly that Amma might speak kindly of him in front of them. He was wrong. During dinner, Mr. Mensah asked casually, So, Kwame, how is work? Kwame opened his mouth to answer, but Amma spoke first. He's still searching, she said lightly. You know how these things are. Mr. Mensah nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. Searching for how long? Kwame cleared his throat. I've had some leads, Amma cut in again, but nothing solid yet. Mr. Mensah leaned back in his chair. A man must stand on his feet, he said. Dependence is dangerous. Kwame felt his chest tighten. After her parents left, Kwame confronted Amma. You didn't have to speak for me, he said quietly. You made me look weak. She shrugged. I told the truth. You stripped me of my voice, he replied. Amma scoffed. If you had something worth saying, I wouldn't need to speak for you. That night, Kwame sat alone in the living room long after Amma went to bed. He didn't turn on the lights. He didn't open his laptop. He just sat. Something inside him hardened not into anger, but into resolve. He realized that humiliation was no longer private. It now had witnesses, friends, family, strangers. And if he didn't change his situation soon, it would define him. Kwame whispered to himself, this will not be my ending. But deep down he knew the truth. Before his life could rise, something else would have to fall. And the cracks in his marriage were already spreading fast. The house was unusually quiet that night. Kwame sat on the edge of the bed, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped together as if he were holding himself in place. Amma lay on the other side, her back turned to him, scrolling through her phone. The soft glow from the screen reflected on the wall, but it brought no warmth to the room. Kwame took a deep breath. Amma, he said softly. Can we talk? She didn't respond. He waited a few seconds, then tried again. Please. I just need a moment. Amma sighed loudly and turned slightly, not enough to face him, but enough to show her irritation. What is it now? Kwame swallowed. His chest felt tight. What happened today? The way you spoke to me in front of Kofi. It hurt, she scoffed. So now I have to measure my words in my own house. That's not what I mean, Kwame said quickly. I just want you to understand how it makes me feel. I already feel small out there. When I come home, I need to feel like I still have a partner. Amma finally turned to face him. Her eyes were sharp. A partner carries weight, a partner contributes. Kwame nodded slowly. I know, and I'm trying, every day. She laughed short and bitter. Trying again. Kwame closed his eyes for a moment, steadying himself. Listen, I didn't plan to say this, but maybe it's time I ask. Amma raised an eyebrow. Ask what? Kwame hesitated. Your father. He knows people. He understands this industry. Maybe, just maybe, he could help me get one small contract. One chance. I don't want favors. I just want an opportunity to prove myself. The room went still. Amma sat up abruptly. So that's it, she said coldly. Now it comes out. Kwame frowned. What comes out? The real reason you married me, she snapped. My father. His connections. Kwame's eyes widened. No. Amma, that's not true. I married you because I love you. She shook her head. You men are all the same. You seek comfort and think it's your ladder. Kwame reached for her hand instinctively, but she pulled away. You think my father will just hand you a contract because you sleep next to his daughter? She continued. Do you know how embarrassing that is? Kwame's voice dropped. I wasn't asking him to hand me anything, just to introduce me. After that, my work would speak for itself. Amma stood up from the bed. I regret even listening to this, she said. I should have known. Kwame stood too, his hands slightly raised. Amma, please. I'm still your husband. She turned her back on him. Then start acting like one. She climbed back into bed facing the wall again, pulling the blanket over her shoulder, as if to shut him out completely. Kwame stood there in the dark, his heart pounding. That night, sleep did not come. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word, every accusation. He thought of the man he used to be, confident, hopeful, certain that love could overcome anything. He wondered when that man had started to disappear. A week passed. The house remained tense. Conversations were short and necessary. Amma moved through the space like Kwame wasn't there. He felt like a stranger sharing walls with someone who once promised forever. Still, he did not stop trying. Every morning, Kwame sat at his desk, sending proposals, updating his portfolio, researching companies. His phone stayed silent, until one morning it rang. It was Kofi. Kofi's voice was filled with excitement. I have good news. Kwame smiled weakly. Tell me. I got the job, Kofi said. That company I told you about, they hired me. I signed yesterday. Kwame's smile grew genuine. That's amazing, my brother. I'm proud of you. That's not all, Kofi continued. They gave me a company car and an apartment in East Legon. Kwame paused. His hand tightened around the phone. Wow, that's big. I told you things would turn around, Kofi said warmly. And yours will too. I believe in you. Kwame nodded, even though Kofi couldn't see him. Thank you. When the call ended, Kwame sat quietly for a long time. He was happy for his friend, truly. But beneath that happiness was a deep, aching question he could no longer ignore. When would it be his turn? That morning, Kwame decided to act. He ironed his cleanest shirt, packed his proposal documents, and prepared for a meeting he had been trying to secure for months. A construction firm had finally agreed to see him. Amma had already left for work. Kwame stood in the garage looking at her second car. He hesitated. He had never used it without asking. But he couldn't afford to miss this meeting. Just today, he whispered. He drove carefully, his heart racing, praying silently. God, please, let this be different. The meeting started well. Kwame sat across from the project manager, explaining his ideas with calm confidence. He spoke about timelines, safety, cost, efficiency. The man nodded, clearly interested. Then Kwame's phone buzzed. Amma. He silenced it immediately. Sorry, he said politely. The phone buzzed again and again. The project manager frowned. Is everything all right? Yes, sir, Kwame replied quickly. Please continue. The phone buzzed again, louder this time. The man closed the file. Perhaps you should take that. Kwame shook his head. It's fine. But the buzzing didn't stop. The project manager stood up. If you cannot control your phone, how will you manage a site worth millions? Kwame stood in panic. Please, sir. 1 minute, I can explain. The man pointed to the door. This meeting is over. Kwame walked out in shock, his legs weak, his heart sinking. Outside, he checked his phone. 15 missed calls. Amma called again. He answered. Her voice exploded through the line. Why did you take my car? I had a meeting, Kwame said desperately. an important one. "Don't ever touch my things again," she shouted. "Are you my driver?" Kwame's voice broke. "You ruined everything. That meeting could have changed our lives." She laughed. "So now your failure is my fault." The call ended. That evening, Amma confronted him again. The argument was louder, sharper, more dangerous. And then she did it. She spat in his face. Time froze. Kwame wiped his face slowly. His hand rose halfway, then stopped. Amma smiled coldly. "Touch me and I'll destroy you." Kwame stepped back. In that moment, something inside him died. He turned away, walked into the bedroom, and sat in the dark. Love had turned into war. And the worst part was yet to come. Morning came, but it brought no peace. Kwame had not slept. He sat at the dining table since before dawn, his laptop open, unread emails staring back at him like silent accusations. His eyes were red, his body heavy, but his fingers kept moving. He refreshed job boards, sent follow-up messages, rewrote proposals he had already rewritten 100 times. "One good job," he whispered, "just one." The house was quiet. Amma had already left for work without saying a word. The argument from the night before still echoed in his mind, the spit on his face, the threat in her eyes. Kwame tried to push it away, telling himself it was just anger, just words. Then there was a knock, not a gentle knock, a violent, deliberate pounding that shook the door. Kwame froze. The knock came again, louder, harder. His heart began to race. Slowly he stood and walked toward the door. He peered through the curtain, and what he saw drained the color from his face. Standing outside were 3 men. Amma's father, Mr. Mensah, stood in front. Beside him were 2 uniformed soldiers, their expressions hard and unreadable. Kwame's hands trembled as he opened the door. Before he could speak, Mr. Mensah pointed at him. "So this is the man beating my daughter," he shouted. Kwame's mouth fell open. "Sir, no. That's not true. I didn't touch Amma, I swear." Mr. Mensah didn't listen. One of the soldiers stepped forward and grabbed Kwame's arm. The other seized his shirt. "Wait," Kwame cried. "Please let me explain." But explanations were not welcome. Neighbors began to gather, drawn by the noise. Curtains shifted. Doors cracked open. Kwame felt every pair of eyes on him as he was dragged outside like a criminal. Amma stood near her father's car holding her phone. She didn't look at Kwame. Not once. "Please," Kwame begged, his voice breaking. "Amma, tell him the truth, please." She turned away. That silence hurt more than the grip on his arms. They took Kwame to the barracks. There they ordered him to kneel under the burning sun. Cold water was poured over him. He was shouted at, pushed, made to crawl across rough ground. Each command came with humiliation. Each hour stripped him of dignity. Kwame didn't fight back. He didn't scream. Tears rolled down his face quietly, not from the pain, but from the betrayal. "How could she do this to me?" he whispered. No one answered. That day, something inside Kwame broke permanently. After 3 days, he was released. When he returned home, his body was covered in bandages. His lips were cracked. His steps were slow and uneven. The house looked the same, but he felt like a stranger entering it. Amma was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. Kwame stood in front of her. "Why?" he asked softly. "Why did you lie?" She didn't stand up. She didn't apologize. Instead, she reached for a white envelope on the table and threw it at him. "Sign it," she said flatly. "I want a divorce. Leave my house today." Kwame stared at the envelope. His hands shook as he opened it. Divorce papers, real, final. He looked at Amma, searching for something: regret, guilt, even anger. There was nothing, just cold determination. Kwame nodded slowly. He didn't argue. He went into the bedroom and packed a small bag. He left behind the watch she had bought him, the perfume, anything that carried her memory. At the door, he turned back one last time. Amma had already changed the TV channel. Kwame walked out. The sky was dark. The street was quiet. He stood there for a moment, unsure where to go. Then he called Kofi. "Can I stay with you?" he asked quietly. Kofi didn't hesitate. "My door is open." When Kwame arrived, Kofi barely recognized him. His face was swollen. Bandages wrapped his arm. His eyes looked hollow. "What happened to you?" Kofi asked, horrified. Kwame sat down heavily. "I didn't touch her," he said. "But she told her father I did." Kofi's eyes filled with tears. Kwame handed him the divorce papers. "She threw me away," he said, "just like that." Kofi placed a hand on his shoulder. "You will not end like this," he said firmly. "I promise you." That night, Kwame lay on Kofi's couch, staring at the ceiling. He had lost his marriage. He had lost his home. He had lost his name. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the pain and humiliation, a small spark remained, and it refused to die. Kwame's life shrank overnight. From a married man with a home, no matter how cold it had become, he was now a guest on another man's couch. Kofi's apartment was modest but clean, filled with the quiet dignity of someone who had struggled and survived. Yet for Kwame, every inch of the place reminded him that he had fallen further than he ever imagined. The first few days passed in silence. Kwame woke up early out of habit, long before Kofi left for work. He folded the blanket carefully, washed the cup he used, and sat by the window with his laptop open. He did not want to feel like a burden. He did not want pity. What he wanted, what he needed, was a way back to himself. But the world did not rush to welcome him. Emails went unanswered. Calls were ignored. Promises dissolved into nothing. Kwame's bank account dropped closer to zero each day, and he counted his money carefully, stretching meals, refusing to complain. Pride, even wounded pride, still lived in him. One evening, Kofi returned home smiling broadly, his energy filling the room. "My brother," Kofi said, tossing his car keys on the table, "I got promoted today." Kwame stood up immediately. "That's amazing," he said, pulling Kofi into a hug. "You deserve it. You don't sound sad," Kofi asked carefully. "After everything you're going through," Kwame shook his head. "Your progress doesn't steal from mine. Your win is my win." It was true. And yet later that night, when Kofi had gone to bed, Kwame knelt beside the couch and whispered into the quiet room, "God, please remember me too." The next morning, Kwame decided to leave the apartment early. He needed air, space, direction. He walked through the streets of the city, past construction sites buzzing with life. Workers shouted instructions, cement mixed, steel clanged. Buildings rose from dust and sweat. This was his world. He stopped outside a church he used to attend before marriage. For a moment he hesitated. Then he walked in. Inside, Pastor Daniel looked up and smiled gently. "Kwame, it's been a long time." Kwame sat across from him, his shoulders heavy. "Sir, I'm not okay." The words opened a flood. He told the pastor everything. The marriage, the insults, the false accusation, the soldiers, the divorce papers. His voice broke more than once, but he did not hide his tears. When he finished, Pastor Daniel was silent for a long moment. "Kwame," he said finally, "God is not blind to injustice. But while you wait for the big door to open, do not let your hands be idle." Kwame frowned slightly. "I don't understand." "Start small," the pastor continued. "You are skilled. You don't need $1 million contract to begin again. Use what you have. Build from where you stand." Those words stayed with Kwame as he walked back to Kofi's apartment. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. At Kofi's office, a serious meeting was underway. Senior managers sat around a long table discussing expansion plans. A new branch was being built in another city, and the company needed someone reliable to oversee the project. "We need someone tested," the managing director said. "Someone who won't cut corners." The room fell quiet. Then Kofi raised his hand. "I know someone," he said. All eyes turned to him. He's an engineer and project manager, Kofi continued. He's built major structures before. He's honest, disciplined. He just needs one chance. What's his name? The director asked. Kwame, Kofi replied. I'll bring him. That evening, Kofi burst into the apartment before Kwame could even ask how his day went. Kwame, he said breathless, something big just happened. Kwame looked up. What is it? They want to meet you tomorrow. Kwame froze. Who? My company, Kofi said, grinning. They need someone for a major project. I told them about you. Kwame sat down slowly. His legs felt weak. You mentioned my name. Yes, Kofi said firmly. And they listened. Tears filled Kwame's eyes. Thank you, he whispered. I thought everyone had forgotten me. Kofi placed a hand on his shoulder. God hasn't. That night, Kwame barely slept, not from fear, but from hope. A dangerous thing when you've been disappointed too many times. The next morning, he woke early. He bathed, carefully dressed in his best clothes, and organized his old portfolio. The papers were worn, but the work was solid, honest. As Kofi drove them to the office, Kwame stared out the window, replaying every failure, every insult. Today, he whispered to himself, I speak for myself. The meeting room was large and intimidating. 5 executives sat across from him, their expressions unreadable. Tell us what you can do, one of them said. Kwame opened his folder and began. He spoke of safety, of timelines, of integrity, of mistakes he had learned from and lessons he would never forget. He did not exaggerate. He did not beg. When he finished, the room was silent. Then the director nodded. We're giving you the contract. Kwame's heart jumped. It's a big job, the director continued. And we expect excellence. You'll get it, Kwame said quietly. The project changed everything. Kwame worked relentlessly. He arrived early and left late. He paid workers on time. He supervised every stage personally. The building rose strong and clean, and when it was done, the company was impressed. Word spread. Calls began to come in. Another project, then another. Within 5 months, Kwame's life looked nothing like it once did. He bought a small house, then a better one. He bought a car. He opened his own office. He hired staff. But success did not make him bitter. His first hire was a young man struggling the way he once had. Someone believed in me, Kwame said. Now it's my turn. One afternoon, as Kwame sat in his new office reviewing plans, there was a knock. It was Kofi. They laughed like children who had survived a storm. You've come far, Kofi said. But this is just the beginning. Kwame looked out the window at the city, at land building's possibilities. For the first time in a long while, he believed it. And somewhere far away, Amma had no idea that the man she had destroyed was quietly becoming unstoppable. Success did not arrive with noise. There was no announcement, no celebration, no apology from the past. Kwame's rise began quietly, built on early mornings, dusty boots, and nights spent reviewing drawings until his eyes burned. The first project he handled under Kofi's company was not glamorous, but it was demanding. Tight deadlines, strict budgets, dozens of workers who watched him closely, measuring his words, testing his authority. Kwame knew one mistake could erase everything, so he gave them no reason to doubt him. He arrived before everyone else and left after the last worker had gone. He inspected materials personally, refused shortcuts, and made safety non-negotiable. When mistakes happened, he took responsibility. When workers performed well, he praised them openly and paid them on time. Slowly, respect followed. When the building was completed ahead of schedule and passed inspection without a single major issue, the directors noticed. They invited Kwame back, this time not as a risk, but as a solution. The bonus he received was modest compared to what he had lost, but to Kwame it meant survival. He moved out of Kofi's apartment and rented a small place of his own. It wasn't fancy, but it was his. For the first time in months, he slept in peace. Work continued to come. One company called asking, "Are you the engineer who handled that branch project?" Another followed, then another. Kwame's name began to circulate quietly through professional circles, not as a man with connections, but as a man who delivered. Within months, he was no longer chasing contracts. Contracts were finding him. He registered his own firm, starting small but structured. He hired an assistant, then a site supervisor. The young man he hired first reminded Kwame of himself, talented, hungry, overlooked. "I know what it's like to wait," Kwame told him. "You won't wait here." Money came, but it didn't change Kwame's character. If anything, it sharpened it. He lived simply, reinvested carefully, and refused to boast. His pain had taught him restraint. Then one afternoon, as Kwame sat reviewing accounts, Kofi dropped by unexpectedly. "This office suits you," Kofi said, smiling as he looked around. "But I think you're thinking too small." Kwame leaned back. "Small thinking kept me alive." Kofi shook his head. "You already build structures. Why not build ownership?" Kwame frowned. "What do you mean, real estate?" Kofi replied. "Land, estates, investment. You have the skill. Now you have the capital." The idea unsettled Kwame at first. Ownership felt dangerous, too much risk, too much memory of how quickly things could be taken away. But that night he couldn't stop thinking about it. Land did not lie. Buildings did not betray. Kwame began carefully. He bought a small parcel on the outskirts of the city, developed it slowly, sold it at a profit, then repeated the process. This time, growth came faster. He hired more staff, expanded his firm. His account balance grew steadily, not recklessly, but intentionally. By the end of the first year, Kwame had achieved something that once felt impossible: stability. But while Kwame was rising, Amma's world was quietly shrinking. After the divorce, she had felt powerful, free, untouched. At first, she enjoyed the silence of the house, the freedom to come and go without explanation. She dressed well, went out often, posted pictures that suggested happiness. But loneliness has a sound, and it grows louder at night. Her father called frequently, always asking the same question. "When will you bring me a grandchild?" Amma brushed it off, irritated. "Daddy, not now." But his voice was aging, weakening. Work began to feel heavier too. Without her father's constant presence at the company, her position no longer felt guaranteed. Meetings became colder. Decisions went over her head. Still, she never once thought of Kwame. Not until one evening when she overheard colleagues talking. "Have you heard about that engineering firm?" one asked. "The new one?" "Yes," another replied. "The owner is impressive, quiet guy, delivers every time." Amma barely listened until she heard the name. "Kwame." Her hand froze. "Kwame," she repeated aloud. The women turned to her. "Yes, Kwame Mensa. You know him." Amma forced a laugh. "No. Just sounds familiar." That night she went home uneasy. She searched the name online. What she found unsettled her. Photos of construction sites, articles praising project efficiency, a registered company profile, all recent, all real. Amma closed her laptop. "No," she whispered. "It can't be him." But deep inside, doubt crept in. Days later, the call came. It was her father's house help, panic in her voice. "Madam, your father collapsed." Amma dropped everything and rushed to the hospital, fear clawing at her chest. She arrived, breathless, her heart racing. The doctor met her outside the emergency room. "I'm sorry," he said gently. "We did everything we could." The words shattered her. Her father was gone. The funeral was grand, filled with important faces and quiet whispers. Amma sat beneath the white tent, dressed in black, feeling strangely detached. People offered condolences, but their words passed through her like air. When the ceremony ended and the crowd dispersed, reality arrived. Two men in suits waited at the gate. They introduced themselves calmly, professionally. "Madam, your father's assets are under review," Amma frowned. "What does that mean?" They handed her a file: loans, collateral, default notices. Her father had borrowed heavily years ago, his company, properties, shares, all pledged. Amma's hands shook as she read. "What happens now?" she asked. One of the men met her eyes. "The company will be auctioned." Amma's world tilted. She had lost her father, now she was losing everything else. A week later, the auction hall was full. Amma sat quietly at the back, barely breathing. Numbers flew across the room, bids climbing higher than she could imagine. Then a voice cut through the air. 1.2 million. The room stilled. The auctioneer smiled. "Sold." Amma looked up. Her breath caught. Kwame stepped forward, confident, calm, unrecognizable. Her heart pounded as reality crashed into her. The man she had humiliated, the man she had accused, the man she had thrown away, now owned her father's company. Kwame signed the papers without a glance in her direction. As he walked out, Amma followed him outside. "Why?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Why would you do this?" Kwame turned slowly. "I didn't do it for revenge," he said evenly. "I did it because I could, and because the company deserved to survive." Amma swallowed hard. Kwame met her eyes once more. "Next time," he said quietly, "treat people with dignity. Poverty is not permanent." Then he walked away. Amma stood alone, watching his car disappear. For the first time, she understood. Power does not always shout. Sometimes it returns quietly to collect the truth. The silence that followed Kwame's departure was heavier than any insult Amma had ever thrown. She remained standing outside the auction hall long after his car disappeared into traffic. People brushed past her: lawyers, investors, reporters, but none of them saw her. To them, she was just another face in the crowd. To herself, she was a woman standing in the ruins of her own choices. Amma returned home that evening to a house that felt unfamiliar. The walls were the same. The furniture hadn't moved. Yet everything felt smaller, emptier. The confidence she once wore like armor had cracked, and now doubt seeped through every thought. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her phone. No missed calls, no messages. Her father was gone. The company was gone. And the man who once begged for her belief now had no reason to look back. For the first time since the divorce, Amma allowed herself to remember, not selectively, not defensively, but honestly. She remembered Kwame waking early every morning, laptop open, eyes tired but determined. She remembered how he spoke of buildings with passion, how his hands moved as if shaping the future in the air. She remembered the night she spat on his face and how he stepped back instead of raising his hand. Her chest tightened. "I didn't think it would end like this," she whispered. Across the city, Kwame sat alone in his new office long after his staff had left. The lights were dim. The air was quiet. On his desk lay the finalized documents confirming the acquisition of Jerry Khan Engineering, the company that once symbolized everything he was denied. He did not feel triumphant. He felt reflective. Kofi had called earlier, his voice full of disbelief. "You actually bought it. Do you know what that means?" Kwame knew. It meant he had crossed a line that once felt impossible. It meant he now sat on the other side of doors that used to slam in his face. But it also meant facing the past without bitterness. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. For a moment, images rushed in: soldiers dragging him away, neighbors watching Amma's cold stare, the divorce papers fluttering to the floor. Kwame exhaled slowly. He had survived. The next morning, Kwame called a meeting with the senior staff of Jerry Khan Engineering. Many of them had worked under Amma's father for decades. They were nervous, unsure of what the new owner would bring. Kwame stood before them calmly. I'm not here to erase the past, he said. I'm here to protect the future. Your jobs are safe. Your experience matters. We will rebuild together. Murmurs spread through the room. Relief, surprise, hope. Kwame continued, this company will stand on integrity, not intimidation. If you work hard, you'll be respected. When the meeting ended, several employees approached him quietly. Thank you, one said. We were afraid. Kwame nodded. I know what fear feels like. That afternoon, Amma received a letter. It was from the loan company, final confirmation that she retained ownership of only one property, the house she lived in. Everything else had been transferred. She sat at the dining table holding the paper, hands trembling. All her life, security had come from outside, from her father's power, from her husband's patience, from money she didn't earn. Now there was nothing left to hide behind. She considered calling Kwame. Her finger hovered over his name. Then she stopped. What would she say? Sorry. The word felt small compared to the damage. Days passed, then weeks. Amma began to notice how people treated her differently. Invitations slowed, calls stopped. Without her father's influence, her voice carried less weight at work. Decisions were made without her. She was no longer protected. One afternoon, her manager called her into his office. We're restructuring, he said carefully. Your role is being reviewed. Amma nodded stiffly. I understand. She walked out with her head held high, but inside panic spread. That night she cried for the first time in years. Not for her father, not for the company, but for herself. For the woman she had been and the woman she now had to become. Across town, Kwame's days grew fuller. Meetings, plans, new projects. Responsibility pressed on him, but it no longer crushed him. He carried it with quiet strength. One evening, as he locked his office, a young engineer approached him nervously. Sir, the man said, thank you for giving me this job. I almost gave up. Kwame smiled gently. Don't. Life changes faster than you think. As he drove home, Kwame thought about forgiveness. Not reconciliation, not forgetting, but release. He knew holding on to anger would chain him to a past he had outgrown. Amma, on the other hand, was learning what it meant to stand alone. She sold her car to manage expenses. She stopped shopping out of habit. She learned to cook meals herself instead of ordering out. These were small changes, but each one stripped away another layer of entitlement. One evening, as rain fell outside, Amma sat by the window watching the city lights blur. Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. Madam Amma, this is the HR office. Please report tomorrow morning regarding your position. Her heart sank. She knew what that meant. The next day she walked into the office and walked out an hour later without a job. No drama, no shouting, just a quiet decision. Amma returned home and sat on the floor, her back against the couch. The house echoed with emptiness. She laughed once, a broken sound. So this is it, she murmured. At the same time, Kwame stood on a balcony overlooking the city, the lights stretching endlessly before him. Kofi joined him, holding 2 bottles of water. You ever think about how close you were to disappearing? Kofi asked softly. Kwame nodded. Every day. And now? Kofi asked. Kwame looked out at the skyline. Now I think about who I can help next. He turned to Kofi. Pain taught me something money never could. Kofi smiled. What's that? Kwame answered without hesitation. Dignity. Far away, Amma lay awake, staring at the ceiling she once thought was permanent shelter. She understood now that wealth without humility was fragile, and love without respect was empty. Her fall was quiet. His rise was quiet too. But one truth echoed through both their lives, now undeniable and irreversible. How you treat people when you feel powerful decides who stands with you when the power is gone. Amma woke up to a silence that felt heavier than the night before. There was no alarm to rush her out of bed, No meeting to prepare for, no office waiting for her presence. The message from HR echoed in her mind, replaying itself with cruel clarity. Her position was gone, reviewed, removed, just like that. She sat up slowly and looked around the room. This house, once a symbol of security, now felt like a reminder of everything she had lost. The walls carried echoes of laughter. She no longer heard conversations that had ended long ago, and a marriage she had crushed with her own hands. Amma stood and walked to the mirror. The woman staring back at her looked unfamiliar. The confidence that once lived in her eyes had faded, replaced by exhaustion and quiet fear. For the first time in her life, she asked herself a question she had always avoided. Who am I without power? Across the city, Kwame's morning began before sunrise. He moved through his new house with calm purpose, reviewing schedules, returning calls, preparing for a full day. His life was busy now, but not chaotic. Pain had disciplined him. Loss had taught him structure. As he drove to the office, traffic thickened around him. The city moved fast, unaware of the journeys unfolding within its streets. Kwame remembered a time when he walked these same roads with nothing but hope and humiliation. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, grounding himself in the present. At Jerrycon, engineering change was already visible. Departments were reorganized. Old systems were replaced. Corruption was confronted. Workers who had lived in fear under previous management began to speak freely. Kwame insisted on transparency, fair pay, and accountability. Some resisted. Things have always been done this way, one manager protested. Kwame met his eyes steadily. Then they will now be done better. Word spread quickly. Jerrycon was no longer just surviving. It was healing. Meanwhile, Amma spent her days learning what survival truly meant. She visited offices looking for work, only to be met with polite smiles and vague promises. Without her father's influence, doors didn't open easily. Some never opened at all. At first, she blamed everyone else, the economy, bad luck, timing. But late at night, when distractions faded, truth crept in. She remembered how she laughed when Kwame begged for support, how she spat on his face, how she watched silently as soldiers dragged him away. Her stomach twisted. I destroyed him, she whispered. And yet he rose. Amma's phone buzzed one afternoon. It was an invitation from a former colleague to a small gathering. She hesitated, then accepted, hoping to feel normal again. The room was filled with familiar faces, but the warmth was gone. Conversations stopped when she approached. Smiles felt forced. Someone whispered, "Isn't she the one whose husband bought her father's company?" Amma pretended not to hear. She left early, the weight of judgment pressing against her chest. That night she sat alone and cried, not dramatically, not loudly, but deeply. The kind of tears that come when denial finally collapses. Across town, Kwame attended a business forum. He wasn't scheduled to speak, but people recognized him. They asked for advice. They shook his hand with respect. "You handled that acquisition with Class 1," investor said. Kwame nodded politely. "I focused on the work." "And the past?" the man asked carefully. Kwame smiled faintly. "I left it where it belongs." But the past was not done with him. A week later, Kwame received a message he didn't expect. Amma had sent an email. It was short, careful, hesitant. "I don't expect forgiveness. I only want to say, I see now. And I'm sorry." Kwame stared at the screen for a long time. He felt nothing at first. Then something like relief. Not because she apologized, but because he no longer needed it. He closed the email without replying. Forgiveness, he knew, did not require conversation. It required peace. Amma waited. No response came. Days passed, then weeks. She finally understood that some bridges once burned were not meant to be rebuilt. And that was part of the lesson. One evening as rain poured outside, Amma sat at the same dining table where she once threw divorce papers at Kwame. The memory stung sharply. She whispered into the empty room, "If I could go back." But time does not reverse for regret. Kwame, on the other hand, used his present to shape the future. He started a small mentorship program within his company, training young engineers from disadvantaged backgrounds. He remembered what it felt like to be unseen, unheard, unwanted. "You don't need connections to succeed," he told them. "You need character and consistency." They listened because he was living proof. Amma's finances dwindled. She sold furniture, let go of habits that once defined her. Each sacrifice stripped her of arrogance and left behind humility. One morning she walked past a construction site and stopped. The banner read, "Project managed by Kwame Mensah." Her heart clenched. She stood there for a long time, watching workers move with purpose, hearing instructions delivered calmly and clearly. This was the man she called useless. This was the man she discarded. Amma turned away slowly, shame following her like a shadow. She went home and updated her resume honestly this time. No embellishments, no titles borrowed from her father, just her skills, just her willingness to start again. That night she whispered a prayer she had never prayed before. "Teach me humility." Kwame stood at his window later that same night, city lights glowing beneath him. Kofi stood beside him, thoughtful. "You ever think she's struggling now?" Kofi asked quietly. Kwame nodded. "I know she is." "And how do you feel about that?" Kwame took a long breath. "I don't celebrate it. I don't wish her harm. But I won't carry her pain for her." Kofi smiled. "That's growth." Kwame nodded. Consequences teach lessons no lecture ever could. As the rain washed the city clean, two lives continued forward, separate, reshaped, and forever changed. One learned power through humility. The other learned humility through loss, and neither would ever be the same again. Time did not heal everything, but it rearranged the truth. Weeks turned into months, and the city continued its restless rhythm, indifferent to personal victories and private failures. For Kwame, time became a teacher, strict, demanding, but fair. For Amma, time became a mirror, forcing her to confront the parts of herself she had long avoided. Kwame's days were full, but his nights were quiet. He spent long hours refining systems at Jerrycon Engineering, ensuring that what he rebuilt would not collapse under the weight of old habits. He met with department heads, listened more than he spoke, and insisted on documentation for every decision. Some employees struggled with the new structure. Others flourished. Kwame noticed the difference quickly. Those who valued shortcuts resisted accountability. Those who valued growth embraced it. He promoted based on performance, not loyalty, and slowly the company's culture shifted. One afternoon, a senior engineer approached him. "Sir," the man said cautiously, "people respect you, but they also fear you." Kwame looked up. "Why?" "Because you don't shout," the man replied. "You don't threaten, you just replace." Kwame nodded thoughtfully. "Fear isn't my goal. Standards are." The engineer smiled faintly. "Then you're doing it right." That same afternoon, Amma sat in a small cafe across town staring at her phone. She had applied for another position, an entry-level role far below what she once considered acceptable. The reply came quickly. "We regret to inform you." She closed her eyes. Rejection was no longer shocking. It had become familiar. Amma paid for her drink and walked home under the hot sun, her thoughts heavy. She passed by luxury stores she once entered without checking prices. Now she didn't slow down. At home, she opened a cupboard and stared at the remaining items she could sell. Each object represented a chapter of her old life, expensive, fragile, temporary. She chose one. Letting go no longer felt dramatic. It felt necessary. That evening, Amma received a call from her aunt. "You need to come stay with me." the woman said gently. This house is too big for one person. Amma hesitated. I'll manage. There was a pause. Pride has already cost you enough, her aunt replied softly. Amma swallowed. I know. She agreed to move. Packing took longer than expected, not because there was much left, but because each item carried memory. The wedding album, the suit Kwame once wore, the space where their arguments echoed. Amma closed the door behind her without looking back. At his office, Kwame reviewed a proposal from a new partner, an international firm interested in a joint venture. The numbers were promising. The opportunity was significant, but Kwame paused. He had learned that growth without values led to collapse. He requested a second meeting, asked deeper questions, pushed for clarity. Some partners withdrew, others stayed. Kwame chose carefully. One evening he visited the construction site of a community center his company had begun developing pro bono. It wasn't profitable. It wasn't strategic. It was necessary. Children gathered around him curious. One asked, "Are you the boss?" Kwame smiled. "I work here." The child nodded approvingly. That felt better than any title. Amma arrived at her aunt's home with 2 suitcases. The house was small, modest, filled with the smell of home-cooked food and quiet routines. No staff, no drivers. Her aunt showed her the spare room. "This is temporary," Amma said quickly. Her aunt smiled. "So is everything." The first night, Amma couldn't sleep. The bed felt unfamiliar. The silence was different, less empty, more honest. She stared at the ceiling and thought about the choices that brought her here. The words she used like weapons. The moments she chose pride over compassion. "I didn't know better," she whispered. Then she corrected herself. "I chose not to know." The next morning, Amma helped prepare breakfast. The simple act felt strange at first, then grounding. Her aunt noticed. "You're learning," she said. Amma nodded. "I have to." Days passed. Amma began helping at a small local office through her aunt's recommendation. The pay was low. The tasks were repetitive, but the work was real. She arrived early, took notes, listened. No one knew her past. No one cared. For the first time, she was judged only by what she did that day. Kwame, meanwhile, faced a different kind of test. A former associate approached him with a proposal that promised fast profit but required bending regulations. It was tempting, lucrative, easy. Kwame listened carefully, then shook his head. "I've already paid the price for shortcuts," he said. "I won't charge interest on that lesson." The associate laughed awkwardly and left. Kofi later asked him about it. "You could have doubled your returns," Kofi said. Kwame shrugged. "I'm not in a hurry anymore." That night, Kwame received another message from Amma. This time it was longer. She wrote about her father, about losing everything, about the job she now worked. She didn't ask for help. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She just told the truth. Kwame read it slowly. He didn't respond, but he didn't delete it either. Forgiveness, he knew, sometimes lived quietly between silence and acceptance. Amma continued her routine. Work, home, sleep, repeat. One afternoon, she overheard colleagues discussing a large infrastructure project. "Jerry Khan Engineering is handling it," someone said. "The new owner is solid." Amma's chest tightened. She said nothing. That evening, she walked past the site again. This time, she stood farther away. She watched as Kwame addressed a group of workers, calm and focused. She realized then that he had not just rebuilt his life, he had rebuilt his identity. Amma turned away before he could see her. Some meetings were not meant to happen again. Kwame stood at the site, feeling the wind on his face. He thought about how far he'd come, not in distance, but in depth. He had learned that dignity wasn't granted. It was defended. And sometimes the loudest lessons were written in silence. Change did not announce itself with miracles. It arrived quietly disguised as routine. For Amma, the days began to look the same. Wake early, prepare modestly, take the bus to work, return home tired but honest. The small office where she now worked was nothing like her father's company. There were no executive chairs, no assistants hovering, no air of unquestioned authority. Here she answered phones, filed documents, typed reports. At first, the simplicity felt like punishment. Then it became grounding. Her supervisor, a woman not much older than her, noticed Amma's diligence. She didn't flatter. She didn't complain. She listened carefully and corrected mistakes without excuse. "You work like someone who has lost something important," the woman said one afternoon. Amma paused. "I have." The supervisor nodded. "Good. Loss teaches focus." For the first time in a long while, Amma felt seen, not for her surname, not for her past, but for her effort. Meanwhile, Kwame's life expanded steadily, but with intention. The acquisition of Jerrycon Engineering had brought attention, and with attention came scrutiny. Investors wanted speed. Partners wanted scale. Everyone wanted more. Kwame wanted stability. He spent long hours meeting with teams, reviewing compliance, strengthening governance. He refused deals that promised quick returns without solid foundations. Some criticized him for being too cautious. "Opportunity doesn't wait," one consultant warned. Kwame replied calmly, "Neither does collapse." He had learned the cost of impatience. One afternoon, Kwame received an invitation to speak at a regional development forum. He hesitated. Public recognition still made him uncomfortable. But Kofi encouraged him. "Your story isn't just yours anymore," Kofi said. "It belongs to people who need proof." Kwame agreed. The forum was packed. Engineers, entrepreneurs, students, government officials. Kwame stood at the podium, the microphone cool beneath his hand. "I wasn't always successful," he began. "I wasn't always respected, but I learned something important. Skill is wasted without integrity, and integrity is invisible without patience." The room was silent. Kwame spoke about failure, about humiliation, about rebuilding without shortcuts. He did not mention Amma. He did not mention soldiers or spit or divorce papers. He spoke about dignity. The applause was long, but Kwame left quietly, slipping out before the congratulations could weigh him down. Across town, Amma attended a small training workshop her office organized. She sat among interns and junior staff, taking notes diligently. No one knew who she used to be, and for the first time she was grateful. After the session, a young woman approached her. "You ask good questions," she said. "Where did you learn that?" Amma smiled faintly. "From mistakes." The woman laughed. "That's the best teacher." That night, Amma returned to her aunt's house and cooked dinner without being asked. They ate together quietly. "You're different," her aunt observed. Amma nodded. "I had to become." Later, alone in her room, Amma opened her laptop and reread Kwame's silence. She no longer expected a response. She understood now that accountability didn't always end in reconciliation. Some consequences were permanent. Weeks passed. Amma was given more responsibility at work. Small decisions, small trust, each earned carefully. She failed sometimes, but she owned it, apologized, corrected. Her confidence returned, not loud, not arrogant, but rooted. One afternoon, her supervisor called her in. "We're expanding," she said. "I need someone reliable. It's not a promotion yet, but it's a step." Amma felt a quiet surge of pride. "Thank you." That evening, she walked home feeling lighter. At the same time, Kwame faced an unexpected challenge. A major contractor failed to meet safety standards on one of his sites. Pressure mounted to overlook it. Deadlines were tight, penalties severe. Kwame shut the site down. "People's lives are not negotiable," he said firmly. The decision cost money, delayed timelines, angered stakeholders, but it saved something more important: trust. News of his stance spread. Regulators took note. Communities noticed. Workers felt protected. Kwame's reputation shifted from competent to principled. One evening, as Kwame reviewed reports in his office, Kofi walked in smiling. "Do you know what they're calling you now?" he asked. Kwame looked up. "What? The man who doesn't bend." Kwame smiled slightly. "I've bent enough in my life." Kofi studied him. "Have you ever thought about closure?" Kwame paused. "I have closure." Kofi nodded. "Then you're free." Amma, on the other hand, was learning what freedom really meant. It wasn't luxury. It was accountability without fear. One weekend, she volunteered at a local outreach program her aunt supported. The work was simple: organizing supplies, helping children with homework, serving meals. A little girl tugged at her sleeve. "Are you coming again next week?" Amma smiled. "Yes," the girl grinned. "Good." That night, Amma cried quietly, not from regret, but from release. She realized that rebuilding wasn't about regaining what she lost. It was about becoming someone who could be trusted again. Across the city, Kwame stood on his balcony, watching the lights flicker on as evening settled. He thought about the man he once was, standing in borrowed shoes, afraid he would never be enough. He had learned that worth was not given by marriage money or approval. It was claimed through endurance. Amma lay in bed later that night, staring at the ceiling of a room she hadn't chosen but had grown into. She whispered a promise to herself. "I will never measure people by what they have again." 2 lives, 2 paths. Both moving forward, no longer tied by love or resentment, but by the lessons they carried. And in the quiet spaces between ambition and humility, something rare was forming. Not reunion, not revenge, but growth that did not need witnesses. The city moved faster than memory. Traffic roared. Buildings climbed higher. New names replaced old ones on office doors and construction banners. Life did not pause to honor pain or celebrate redemption. It simply advanced. And within that movement, 2 lives continued forward on paths that no longer belonged together. Kwame's calendar was full for the next 6 months. Projects overlapped, meetings stacked. Site inspections filled his mornings and boardrooms claimed his afternoons. Jerry Khan Engineering, once weakened by debt and fear, now stood firm. Processes were documented, audits were clean, workers felt protected, investors felt secure. Yet Kwame never allowed success to dull his awareness. He visited sites unannounced, asked questions others avoided, listened more than he spoke. His presence was calm but commanding, not because he demanded respect, but because he embodied it. One morning, his assistant entered his office holding a file. "Sir, there's an invitation from the ministry," she said. "They're organizing a public-private partnership forum next month. They want you to attend." Kwame skimmed the letter. Government officials, contractors, development agencies. He hesitated. Public events still made him uneasy. Not because of fear, but because he preferred work over recognition. But this one mattered. "These decisions affect communities," Kofi said later when Kwame mentioned it. "If you don't sit at the table, someone else will decide for you." Kwame nodded slowly. "Then I'll go." Across the city, Amma was experiencing a different kind of growth. Her supervisor trusted her with coordinating a small project, nothing grand but visible. Amma handled logistics carefully, communicated clearly, and delivered on time. It wasn't perfection, but it was progress. "You've changed," her supervisor said afterward. "You don't rush to impress. You focus on results." Amma smiled. "I learned the hard way." The praise stayed with her. That evening, Amma visited a friend she hadn't seen since before the divorce. The woman welcomed her warmly but cautiously. "You disappeared," the friend said gently. Amma nodded. "I had to." They talked for hours about work-life loss. At one point, the friend asked quietly, "Do you ever hear from him?" Amma knew who she meant. "No," Amma replied. "And I don't expect to." There was no bitterness in her voice, only acceptance. Weeks later, the forum arrived. Kwame entered the conference hall early, dressed simply. He took a seat near the front, reviewing notes. Around him, conversations buzzed: politics, funding, influence. He focused on substance. Amma arrived later that morning, assisting her office with registration and coordination. She wore a plain outfit, professional but unremarkable. Her role was minor, supportive. She moved through the hall, efficiently focused on tasks, until she saw the banner. Keynote speaker Kwame Mensah, CEO Jerry Khan Engineering. Her breath caught. She froze for a moment, heart pounding. She had known he was successful now. She had seen his name on sites and reports. But seeing it displayed publicly, honored, respected, felt different, real. Amma lowered her gaze and continued working. Kwame stepped onto the stage shortly after. He spoke about infrastructure not as profit but as responsibility, about how buildings outlast egos, about how shortcuts collapse under pressure. He spoke calmly, without drama. The audience listened. Amma stood at the back of the hall, unseen, listening. She remembered the man who once begged her for belief, the man she dismissed as weak. Now he stood unshaken. Kwame finished his speech to steady applause. He nodded politely and stepped down, returning to his seat. As the hall shifted into networking mode, people gathered around him. Questions, introductions, cards exchanged. Amma moved quietly toward the exit. She did not want to be seen, but fate does not always respect distance. As Kwame walked toward a side corridor, checking his phone, he looked up, and there she was. Amma stopped. So did he. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed. No anger surged, no triumph, no apology rose to the surface. Just recognition. Amma spoke first. "Hello, Kwame." Her voice was steady. "Hello, Amma," he replied calmly. They stood facing each other, two strangers bound by history but no longer defined by it. "I didn't know you'd be here," she said. "I was invited," Kwame replied simply. There was an awkward pause. "I heard your speech," Amma added. "It was good." "Thank you," Kwame said. Another pause. "I won't take much of your time," Amma said quickly. "I just wanted to say I'm doing better now." Kwame nodded. "I'm glad." She hesitated. "I meant what I wrote, about being sorry." Kwame met her eyes, not cold, not warm, just clear. "I know," he said, "and I've moved on." Amma nodded. "I understand." She stepped aside to let him pass. Kwame walked on without looking back. Amma watched him disappear into the crowd. Her chest tightened, not with regret but with clarity. That chapter was closed. Later that evening, Kwame sat with Kofi at a quiet restaurant. "I saw her today," Kwame said. Kofi raised an eyebrow. "And there was nothing left to say," Kwame replied. "That's how I know I'm free." Kofi smiled. "That's how you know you've healed." Amma returned home that night and sat quietly at her aunt's table. She replayed the encounter not with longing but with gratitude. She had faced him, she had survived it, and she had not fallen apart. That mattered. Kwame returned home and stood at his window, the city glowing beneath him. He thought about how close he once came to disappearing, how easily humiliation could have ended his story. But it didn't, because he chose to endure. Amma lay in bed later that night, staring at the ceiling, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not because things were perfect, but because she had finally accepted responsibility for who she was and who she needed to become. Two paths had crossed briefly. Not to reunite, not to reopen wounds, but to confirm a truth both had learned in different ways. Growth does not always come with reconciliation. Sometimes it comes with quiet closure. After the forum, life returned to its steady rhythm, but something subtle had changed. Kwame felt lighter. Not because he had seen Amma, but because the meeting confirmed what he already sensed: the past no longer had authority over him. He woke the next morning with the same discipline, the same focus, yet without the quiet tension that once lived beneath his success. At the office, new responsibilities awaited. Jerrycon Engineering had secured approval for a large mixed-use development on the edge of the city, housing offices and public spaces designed to serve a growing population. The project required coordination with government agencies, local communities, and international partners. It was complex, expensive, and politically sensitive. Kwame welcomed the challenge. He assembled a diverse team: engineers, planners, safety officers, community liaisons, and set one rule from the start: no one is invisible on this project, he said. If you work here, you are seen. Meetings were long. Debates were intense. Decisions were documented. When conflicts arose between profit and safety, safety won every time. When community leaders raised concerns about displacement, Kwame adjusted plans even when it cost more. Why make it harder for yourself? One investor asked. Kwame replied calmly, because what we build should outlast us. The site became a model for responsible development. Regulators visited. Journalists took notes. Workers spoke with pride. Meanwhile, Amma continued building a quieter life. Her role at the small office expanded slowly. She handled coordination, assisted with budgets, and earned trust through consistency. The praise she received was modest but sincere, and for the first time it felt earned. One afternoon, her supervisor handed her a new assignment. We're partnering with a construction firm on a community facility, she said. You'll handle documentation and coordination. Amma scanned the brief. Her stomach tightened. The firm's name was familiar. She didn't mention it. She simply nodded. I'll take care of it. That evening, Amma sat with her aunt sorting documents. You're quiet, her aunt observed. Amma smiled faintly. Just focused. She had learned not to run from discomfort. The following week, Amma attended a coordination meeting as part of her job. She arrived early, took a seat near the back, and opened her notebook. When Kwame entered the room, there was no shock this time, only composure. They acknowledged each other with a brief nod, professional, neutral. No one else noticed. The meeting proceeded smoothly. Amma asked precise questions. Kwame responded clearly. Their interaction was efficient, respectful, and distant. It felt right. Afterward, as people packed up, Amma gathered her papers. Kwame approached, stopping a respectful distance away. You handled the documentation well, he said. Thank you, Amma replied. Your team is organized. There was no tension, no apology, no reopening, just professionalism. As Amma walked away, she realized something important. She no longer needed his approval to validate her growth. And Kwame, watching her leave, understood that leadership was not measured by how loudly one rose, but by how calmly one treated others, even those who once caused pain. Weeks passed. The project advanced, milestones were met, challenges were addressed without shortcuts. Kwame visited the site, often greeting workers by name, listening to concerns, adjusting schedules. One afternoon, a safety officer reported a potential hazard that could delay the project significantly. Pressure mounted to ignore it. Kwame shut the site down temporarily. Again, the decision sparked debate, frustration, and criticism. But days later, an inspection confirmed the hazard was real. A serious accident had been prevented. The noise died down. Respect deepened. Amma followed the updates through official channels as part of her work. Each report reflected discipline and care. She recognized the pattern not just of competence but of character. One evening, as Amma prepared dinner, her aunt said, "You've become stronger." Amma nodded. "I had to learn to stand without leaning on anyone." Her aunt smiled. That's the kind of strength that lasts. Across the city, Kwame faced a personal decision. A senior manager recommended expanding, rapidly acquiring smaller firms to dominate the market. The numbers were attractive. The risk was high. Kwame took the proposal home and reviewed it late into the night. He thought about his early days sending emails into silence, being judged without mercy, standing powerless at his own door. He thought about the workers who trusted him now, the communities relying on his projects. The next morning, he declined the expansion. "We'll grow," he said, "but not at the cost of our soul." Some called it cautious. Kwame called it wisdom. Amma, too, faced a test. Her supervisor offered her a chance to exaggerate credentials on a proposal to improve their chances. It wasn't illegal, just misleading. Amma remembered who she used to be. She refused. "It's not worth it," she said. "We'll stand on the truth." The supervisor studied her, then nodded. "Good. I needed to hear that." That night, Amma slept well. Months later, the mixed-use development opened its first phase. Families moved in. Small businesses opened. Children played in newly built spaces. The community celebrated. Kwame stood at the edge of the crowd, watching not the cameras, not the speeches, but the people. Kofi joined him. "You did this the hard way," he said. Kwame smiled. "The hard way lasts." Amma attended the opening in a professional capacity, staying behind the scenes. She watched the families, the smiles, the work that mattered. For the first time, she felt proud of being part of something real. As evening fell, Kwame prepared to leave. Amma passed by carrying a folder. They paused briefly. "Take care," Kwame said. "You too," Amma replied. "No past, no future, only the present handled well." As Kwame drove home, the city lights reflected across his windshield. He thought about the measure of a man, not wealth, not revenge, not applause, but the ability to choose integrity when no one was watching. Amma returned home and placed her folder on the table. She felt tired but fulfilled. She had learned the measure of a woman, too. Not by who she married, not by what she inherited, but by the choices she made when power was gone. Two lives rebuilt on different foundations, both standing, both accountable, both free. The morning sun rose gently over the city, casting long shadows across streets that had witnessed too many quiet battles to count. For Kwame, the day began like any other, measured, purposeful, free of urgency. He reviewed schedules, approved budgets, and answered messages with the same calm precision that had come to define his leadership. Yet something felt different, not unsettled, just complete. Jerrycon Engineering was stable. The mixed-use development was thriving. New proposals arrived weekly, but Kwame no longer chased expansion for its own sake. He chose projects that mattered: schools, clinics, community housing work that left something solid behind. At mid-morning, Kofi walked into his office carrying 2 cups of tea. "You look like a man with no unfinished business," Kofi said, handing him a cup. Kwame smiled. "That's because I finally understand what enough feels like." Kofi nodded. "Not many people do." Across the city, Amma stood at a bus stop holding a simple handbag and waiting patiently. Her life now followed a modest rhythm work, home study, volunteer hours on weekends. She had enrolled in evening classes to strengthen her skills, paying fees carefully from her own earnings. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. As the bus arrived, Amma took a seat by the window and watched the city pass by. Construction cranes dotted the skyline, symbols of growth she once associated only with power and status. Now she saw them differently. They were proof that foundations mattered. At the office, Amma's supervisor called a brief meeting. "We received feedback from the development authority," she announced. "Our documentation has been approved without revisions." Amma felt a quiet satisfaction settle in her chest. "Good work," the supervisor added, meeting her eyes. You've become reliable. That's rare. Amma smiled softly. Thank you. Later that afternoon, Kwame attended a final review meeting for the community development project. Representatives from the city council, local leaders, and partner organizations sat around the table. The mood was optimistic. One council member spoke. This project sets a new standard, transparent, inclusive, and delivered with integrity. Kwame inclined his head. We did it together. When the meeting ended, an elderly community leader approached him. You were tested, the man said quietly. And you didn't harden. Kwame considered that. I learned that hardness breaks more than it builds. The leader smiled. Then you've learned well. As evening approached, Amma finished her tasks and prepared to leave. On her way out, she paused by the office window, watching the city glow as lights flickered on. For a moment, she thought of her father, not with bitterness, not with anger, but with clarity. He had taught her ambition, but not humility, power, but not restraint, and she had followed the lessons she knew until life corrected her. I see it now, she whispered. That night, Amma volunteered at the outreach center again. Children crowded around her, asking questions, showing drawings, laughing freely. One boy tugged her sleeve. Will you be here tomorrow, he asked. Amma smiled. Yes, the boy grinned and ran off. She felt something she hadn't felt in years. Belonging. Kwame spent the evening alone at home reading reports by lamplight. He paused occasionally to sip tea, listening to the city breathe outside his window. The stillness felt earned. His phone buzzed once, a message from an unknown number. Thank you for preserving the company my father built. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to acknowledge that. Kwame read the message carefully. He recognized the tone. Amma. He typed a reply, then stopped. He deleted it. Then he typed again. You're welcome. Take care. He sent it. No more was needed. Across the city, Amma read the reply and nodded to herself. She placed the phone face down on the table and continued helping the children with their homework. That exchange was not a reunion. It was closure. Weeks passed. The city continued to change, but the lessons remained. Kwame declined an offer to sell Jerry Khan Engineering at a massive profit. Instead, he established a trust to ensure the company's values would outlive him. He expanded mentorship programs and funded scholarships for students from disadvantaged backgrounds. When asked why, he answered simply, someone once gave me a chance. I'm returning it with interest. Amma completed her first certification course with distinction. Her supervisor recommended her for a more stable role with increased responsibility. She accepted without hesitation. She no longer measured success by titles. She measured it by growth. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, Amma visited her father's grave. She placed flowers gently and stood in silence. I understand now, she said softly. I'll do better. The wind rustled the trees, carrying her words away. Kwame stood on a balcony that same afternoon, watching families move into newly completed homes. Children laughed. Doors opened. Lives continued. Kofi joined him. Do you ever regret it? Kofi asked. The marriage, the pain. Kwame thought carefully. I regret the suffering, but not the lessons. Kofi smiled. Then you won. Kwame shook his head gently. No, I learned. As the sun dipped below the horizon, two lives once tangled in pride and pain stood firmly apart, grounded in understanding. One man learned that dignity cannot be taken, only surrendered. One woman learned that power without compassion collapses. Their story did not end with revenge or reconciliation. It ended with truth. And truth once learned does not need an audience. This story reminds us of a truth that life teaches again and again, often through pain rather than comfort. How you treat people when you feel powerful will define who you become when power is gone. Poverty is not a crime, and wealth is not a measure of character. Respect should never be conditional and love should never be used as a weapon. Kwame lost everything that once gave him a name, his marriage, his home, his dignity. Yet he refused to lose himself. Instead of allowing bitterness to shape him, he chose patience, integrity, and discipline. His rise did not come from revenge, shortcuts, or borrowed influence, but from consistency and self-respect. That is why his success lasted. Amma's journey teaches a different but equally important lesson. Privilege can blind the heart, and pride can destroy what love tries to build. When her power disappeared, she was forced to meet herself honestly for the first time. True growth began only when excuses ended. Redemption does not always mean getting back what was lost. Sometimes it means becoming someone better than you were before. Life is unpredictable. The person you overlook today may be the one you stand before tomorrow. Status changes, money moves, but character speaks when everything else is silent. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. What lesson stood out to you the most? And if you believe stories like this can change hearts and perspectives, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next powerful story.